White Horse saves two girls from a leopard, and what happens next is heartwarming. Kicked out of home, two sisters wandered alone, injured, and with no one to care for them. When a ferocious leopard appeared, the older sister tried to protect her younger sibling with her own body, but a white horse appeared out of nowhere and confronted the beast as if sent by someone. What came after revealed a buried truth, and a reunion no one thought possible. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. We'll continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear in your life. The Kua gate creaked one last time before closing with a dry thud. Emily held her younger sister Sophie's hand firmly while watching the dust settle on the empty road. The house where they had waited for months for their mother's return was now behind them, locked forever. The landlord had been clear. Without payment, there was no place for them there anymore. Sophie pulled at her faded dress and looked up at her older sister with those big, trusting eyes that always sought answers from Emily. At 10 years old, Emily carried a weight on her shoulders that she shouldn't have known yet, but which had become as familiar as thirst in the arid plains. She had promised her mother before she left in search of work that she would take care of Sophie no matter what happened. That promise now echoed in her mind like a distant but persistent bell. The sun had already begun its relentless climb across the sky when the two girls started their walk down the dusty dirt road. Emily carried a small bundle with their few belongings, a worn photograph of the family, a bracelet her mother had given her, and some cookie crumbs she had saved for the journey. Sophie held a frayed rag doll, a remnant from times when there were still bedtime stories and goodnight kisses. The landscape around them stretched endlessly, dotted only with dried brush and rocks that shimmered under the growing heat. Occasionally a bird cut through the silence with its melancholy song, as if it too knew the harshness of living in these lands. Emily had heard about a grandmother who lived in a distant town on the other side of the plains. That was where they were heading, guided only by vague memories of conversations between adults and the hope of finding a safe haven. Each step raised a small cloud of dust that stuck to the girl's already dry skin. Sophie began to complain of thirst after the first hour of walking, but Emily simply squeezed her hand tenderly and whispered words of encouragement. She knew she needed to be strong, that Sophie depended on her now more than ever. The responsibility weighed on her thin shoulders, but it also strengthened her in a way she didn't fully understand herself. The day advanced mercilessly. The heat became increasingly oppressive, and the few shadows offered by the scrawny vegetation were contested even by the lizards hiding among the rocks. Emily rationed the water they carried in the old canteen, always giving more to Sophie than to herself. She saw her little sister beginning to wither, her lips becoming dry and her steps increasingly dragged. When the sun was high in the sky, Sophie tripped on a rock and fell, hurting her knee. Tears welled up in her eyes, not so much from the physical pain, but from the exhaustion and the growing feeling that they were lost in a world too big for them. Emily knelt beside her sister, cleaning the wound carefully using a piece of her own dress moistened with a bit of the precious water. In that moment, while caring for Sophie, Emily felt for the first time the real weight of her promise. It wasn't just about feeding her sister or finding shelter. It was about keeping hope alive in a world that seemed to have forgotten them. It was about being the lighthouse in the darkness, even when she herself felt lost and scared. They continued walking, now more slowly, with Sophie limping slightly. The road stretched ahead like an endless snake, winding between low hills and dry valleys. Occasionally, they spotted an isolated house or an abandoned corral in the distance. But Emily had decided they would only stop when they were truly too exhausted to continue. She had heard stories about people who took advantage of others' vulnerability, and her protection of Sophie also included being wary of others' generosity. The sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. The temperature eased a bit, but thirst and hunger became increasingly present. Sophie wasn't talking as much anymore, just following her sister's steps with a blind confidence that both warmed and terrified Emily's heart. It was then, when darkness began to threaten to swallow the road, that Sophie stepped on a sharp stone half buried in the sand. Her cry of pain echoed through the silent plains, and when Emily looked, she saw blood flowing from her sister's foot. Sophie sat down on the road, crying not only from pain, but from accumulated despair and exhaustion. Emily felt panic rise in her throat, like bitter bile. How could she care for the wound there in the middle of nowhere, without resources, without help? Sophie needed medical attention, a safe place to rest, food and clean water. The promise made to her mother had never seemed so heavy and at the same time so impossible to fulfill. While improvising a bandage with pieces of her own dress, Emily looked around desperately, searching for any sign of help. The plains remained impassive, keeping their secrets and offering only silence as an answer. It was in this moment of greatest despair that she raised her eyes to the horizon and saw something that made her heart leap. A white figure moved on the horizon, silhouetted against the darkening sky. Emily blinked several times, thinking it might be a mirage caused by exhaustion and thirst. But the figure remained there, slowly approaching along the dusty road. It was a horse, thin but proud, with a white mane fluttering in the wind and eyes that shone with a peculiar intelligence. Sophie stopped crying and also fixed her gaze on the animal that was approaching. There was something different about that horse, something that transcended the ordinary. It didn't seem frightened or wild, but it also showed no signs of belonging to anyone. It walked with purpose, as if it knew exactly where it was going and why. The animal stopped a few meters from the girls and observed them with those deep, serene eyes. Emily felt something strange in her chest, a sense of recognition she couldn't explain. The horse took a few steps toward them, and to the sisters' surprise lowered itself slightly, as if offering its back for them to mount. Emily hesitated for a moment. She had grown up in the plains and knew that wild horses didn't act this way. But Sophie, with the natural intuition of children, extended her hand toward the animal. The horse remained motionless, allowing her to caress its velvety muzzle. In its eyes, Emily saw a gentleness that reassured her. Carefully, she helped Sophie climb onto the horse's back, taking the utmost care with her sister's injured foot. Then, she mounted behind her, holding her firmly by the waist. The horse waited patiently for them to settle, and then began to walk, not along the road they had been following before, but on a side trail that Emily hadn't noticed in the growing darkness. The sensation was surreal. The horse seemed to know every rock, every hole in the path, avoiding any sudden movement that might further hurt Sophie's foot. Emily felt as if she were in a dream, being guided by a being that seemed to have stepped out of one of the stories her mother used to tell before bedtime. After a journey of almost an hour, the horse stopped near a set of large rocks that formed a kind of natural shelter. Between them, Emily could hear the soft sound of running water. A hidden creek meandered between the stones, offering the fresh water they so desperately needed. Near the creek, an old oak tree extended its branches, creating a welcoming shade. The girls dismounted from the horse, and Emily ran to the water, filling the canteen and drinking eagerly before helping Sophie do the same. The water was clean and fresh, an indescribable relief after hours of thirst under the scorching sun. She took the opportunity to carefully wash her sister's foot wound, which was no longer bleeding but still needed care. The horse drank from the water calmly and then headed under the oak tree, where it lay down, as if that were its natural resting place. The girls settled close to it, using the animal as a windbreak against the strengthening night breeze. Sophie fell asleep quickly, exhausted by the journey, and calmed by the comforting presence of the horse. Emily stayed awake longer, observing the animal that had appeared like a miracle in their lives. There was something deeply familiar about that being, as if she already knew it from somewhere her memory couldn't reach. During the night, she woke up several times to the sound of the wind, but always found the horse there, vigilant, like a silent guardian protecting their sleep. In the morning, when the first rays of sun pierced through the oak leaves, the animal was still there, calmly grazing near the creek. In the days that followed, they established a strange but comforting routine. The horse remained with them, carrying them during the day along paths it seemed to know perfectly, and at night, offering its presence as protection and comfort. Sophie recovered gradually, playing with the animal and laughing in a way Emily hadn't seen in a long time. Emily began to realize that the horse wasn't leading them randomly. There was purpose in its movements, a clear direction she couldn't fully comprehend. Sometimes it stopped at specific places, as if showing something or waiting for some recognition that didn't come. On a particularly stuffy morning, as they followed a trail covered with low vegetation, they were surprised by a strange noise coming from the bushes. Emily felt her heart race when she saw a thin feline leap from the thicket, with hungry eyes fixed on Sophie, who was walking a few steps ahead. The instinct to protect spoke louder than fear. Emily threw herself in front of her younger sister, extending her arms as if she alone could stop the threat. Her body trembled, but her determination was unshakable. She had promised to protect Sophie and would fulfill that promise, even if it cost her own life. It was then that the horse acted. With a sharp neigh that echoed across the plains, it positioned itself between the girls and the feline, charging against the animal with a strength and courage that didn't seem compatible with its gentle appearance. The feline, surprised by the unexpected intervention, hesitated for a moment before retreating and disappearing again among the bushes. Emily hugged Sophie tightly, feeling her legs shake from the adrenaline of the scare. The horse remained alert for a few minutes, making sure the threat had truly passed before resuming its calm and protective posture. In that moment, Emily understood that she wasn't dealing with just an ordinary animal. There was something greater. There, something that transcended her understanding, but which she accepted with gratitude. From that day on, her perception of the horse changed completely. It was no longer just an animal that had found them by chance. It was a protector, sent by forces she couldn't explain, but in which she was beginning to believe. Sophie also seemed to understand this, treating the horse not as a simple means of transportation, but as a family member they had lost. After the encounter with the feline, the horse led them along a trail that gently climbed between hills covered with cactus and desert brush. At the top of a rise, Emily spotted a simple house, built with clay bricks and covered with red tiles. Smoke came from the chimney, indicating there was life there, and a small yard with chickens pecking completed the welcoming scene. The horse stopped near the wooden gate of the property and remained motionless, as if waiting for the girls to dismount. A middle-aged woman appeared on the porch, with an apron stained with flour and a curious expression on her face. Upon seeing the two children, her features transformed into maternal concern. Mrs. Martha and her husband, Mr. John, welcomed the girls without asking invasive questions. They offered fresh water, hot food, and a place to rest while they cared for Sophie's wound, with medicinal herbs that Mrs. Martha grew in her yard. The couple had lost their only daughter years ago and saw in these lost children an opportunity to exercise again the parental love they kept in their hearts. During the first days at the couple's house, Emily remained distrustful and alert, always ready to leave if necessary. The horse grazed peacefully in the yard, as if it knew that here was a safe place. Sophie, on the other hand, adapted quickly to the new routine, helping Mrs. Martha take care of the chickens and learning to make bread in the clay oven. It was during the second week of their stay that Mr. John brought news that shook Emily's world. He had asked in town about an elderly lady with the name the girls had mentioned, and discovered that the grandmother they were looking for had passed away a few weeks earlier. The last hope of finding a safe home with family had disappeared like a mirage in the desert. Emily received the news in silence, without showing emotion. She had learned to keep pain inside her chest, as if feelings were luxuries she couldn't afford. Sophie cried a little, more from her sister's reaction than from the news itself, since she barely remembered their grandmother. That night, Emily stayed awake, looking at the stars through the small window of the room they shared, and wondering what the next step would be. A few days later, while Mrs. Martha was organizing an old trunk in the attic, she found something that would change everything. Among old clothes and forgotten objects, there was a letter addressed to the girls. The envelope, yellowed by time, bore the names of the two sisters, written in handwriting that Emily immediately recognized. It was from their mother. With trembling hands, Emily opened the letter and read aloud to Sophie. Their mother wrote that she was alive and working in a distant city, saving money to return and get her daughters. Along with the letter was a sum of money and promises that the reunion was near. The date on the letter indicated it had been written months ago but had never reached them. Mrs. Martha and Mr. John exchanged meaningful glances. Hesitantly, they told the girls about a man in the village who used to intercept correspondence, especially those containing money. The man had disappeared a few weeks ago, taking with him not only values, but also the communication between families separated by life's circumstances. The revelation hit Emily like a punch to the stomach. During all those months of waiting and abandonment, their mother had been trying to communicate with them. The feeling of abandonment she carried in her chest transformed into a different pain, more complex and deep. She hadn't been forgotten or abandoned, but a victim of the cruelty and greed of someone who had played with a family's fate. Sophie adapted quickly to rural life, running around the yard, helping with household chores, and laughing with a frequency that warmed everyone's hearts. Emily observed her sister from a distance, happy to see her safe and cheerful, but unable to allow herself the same lightness. She still wore the bracelet given by her mother, even when it hurt her arm that had been injured during their walk across the plains. At night, when everyone was asleep, Emily sometimes felt feverish and delirious. During one of these feverish episodes, she had a vivid and disturbing dream. She saw a man mounted on a white horse, crossing a flood with determination and courage. The man had no defined face, but there was something familiar about his gestures. He smiled at her before disappearing among the turbulent waters, as if saying goodbye. Upon waking from this dream, she found the horse standing beside her bed, observing her with those deep and understanding eyes. There was no logical explanation for how the animal had entered the room, but its presence reassured her in a way she couldn't comprehend. It was as if there was a mutual recognition, a connection that transcended common understanding. In the following weeks, the horse began to demonstrate strange behavior. During their morning walks, it insisted on taking her in a specific direction, further away from the house. Emily resisted, fearing to move too far from Sophie, but the animal's persistence aroused her curiosity. There was something in that direction that the horse wanted to show her, something important she needed to see. Finally, she decided to follow the animal. They walked for almost an hour, through almost imperceptible trails, until they reached an area where the vegetation was denser and the trees taller. There, hidden among vines and roots, were the ruins of an old construction, partially buried by dry mud and vegetation that had grown over the years. The horse stopped near the rubble and remained motionless, as if waiting for Emily to explore the place. Carefully, she began to remove branches and dry leaves, revealing brick walls and pieces of fallen roof. In the center of what had once been a house, she found a rusty metal trunk, half buried but still closed. Inside the trunk, she discovered treasures that changed her understanding of everything. A faded photograph showing her parents when they were young, alongside a white horse, a diary with yellowed pages, and small objects from her early childhood that she didn't know still existed. The handwriting in the diary was her father's, describing life in the old house, plans for the future, and the deep love he felt for his family. The last pages of the diary described a devastating flood that had destroyed the region. Her father had tried to save the family and the animals, mounted on his beloved white horse. He had managed to place Emily, still a baby, and her mother in a safe place, but upon returning to fetch other belongings, he had been surprised by the force of the waters. The horse had survived, but its owner had not returned from that last journey. Emily then understood that her mother hadn't left out of abandonment, but out of desperation and pain. Staying in that place brought memories too painful to bear, and the horse that had found and protected them wasn't an ordinary animal, but the same one that had belonged to her father, fulfilling a silent promise of protection that transcended the very existence of its former owner. Back at Mrs. Martha and Mr. John's house, Emily carefully stored the diary and the photograph, but for the first time since they began their journey, she removed the bracelet that hurt her arm. She placed it with the other found objects, as if she could finally free herself from a weight she had carried for so long. That night, she allowed herself to cry without guilt, letting all the repressed emotions flow like water after a dam breaks. Sophie noticed the change in her sister, and with the natural wisdom of children, simply approached and hugged Emily tightly. They didn't need words to communicate the love and mutual support that had sustained them throughout that journey. The horse observed the scene from a distance, with those serene eyes that seemed to perfectly understand the meaning of that moment of liberation. A few weeks later, news arrived like a warm wind that announces rain on the plains. A distant relative had found their mother in a town in the interior, where she was recovering from an accident that had affected her memory. The woman had been found disoriented and confused, without clearly remembering her past, but was gradually beginning to recover fragments of her memories. The journey to the city where their mother was hospitalized lasted 2 days, cut by anxiety and hope mixed with fear. Emily wondered if her mother would recognize them, if she still loved them, if she could forgive all the misunderstandings and mistakes that had separated them. The horse accompanied them throughout the journey, as if it knew that its mission was not yet complete. The hospital was a simple but clean building, with corridors that smelled of disinfectant and hope. When they finally met in the small white room, there was a moment of painful hesitation. Their mother looked at her daughters with a confused expression, as if trying to connect familiar faces to fragmented memories. Emily held her breath, fearing that all the suffering and the entire journey hadn't been worth it. But then, slowly, she took from her bag the photograph found in the trunk, her father's diary, and the medal she had removed from the horse's mane. She placed everything on the bed, in front of her mother, like pieces of a puzzle that could restore the past. The effect was instantaneous and moving. Tears welled up in her mother's eyes as she touched each object with reverence and recognition. Memories began to flow like dammed water that finally finds its way. She remembered her daughters' names, the old house, the husband lost in the flood, the pain that made her leave in search of a better life for all of them. The reunion was bathed in tears, hugs, and words of love that had waited so long to be pronounced. Their mother asked forgiveness for the lost time, for the letters that never arrived, for the separation that tore the family apart. Emily and Sophie forgave with the natural generosity of those who understand that love sometimes expresses itself through pain and sacrifice. When they left the hospital, their mother decided they would return together to the plains, to Mrs. Martha and Mr. John's house, which had become a temporary but significant home in their lives. During the return journey, they told each other about everything they had experienced during the separation, filling in the gaps left by time and distance. Upon arriving at the rural property, something happened that none of them expected. The horse, which had remained calm throughout the journey, approached the girl's mother with an almost ritual solemnity. It stopped in front of her, and in a gesture that drew exclamations of surprise from all present, knelt down. Then it lowered its head to the ground, exactly as described in the father's diary years before. The mother immediately understood the meaning of that gesture. She also knelt and embraced the animal's neck, whispering words of gratitude for having protected her daughters when she couldn't do it herself. It was as if an ancient promise, made between the father and his beloved horse, was finally being fulfilled. The animal had maintained its silent vigil, protecting the family even after the departure of its former owner. At that precise moment, as if nature wanted to bless that moment of reconciliation, the rain began to fall. It wasn't a timid drizzle, but a strong and persistent rain that the plains hadn't seen in months. The parched earth opened to receive the water with gratitude, and the oak tree under which the girls had found shelter during their journey seemed to bloom instantly. The entire plains breathed relieved, renewed by the arrival of waters that would bring new life to the whole region. Plants would begin to sprout, animals would find fresh water, and hope would return to color the landscape that was once arid and gray. In the simple house of Mrs. Martha and Mr. John, the family reunited and remade itself, but now with a deeper understanding of the bonds that truly matter. They discovered that the strongest ties are not just those of blood, but those forged during life's difficult crossings. They are the bonds created by the solidarity of strangers who open their doors to welcome, by the silent love of an animal that fulfills ancient promises, and by memories that resist time and adversity. The horse remained nearby, no longer as a necessary protector, but as a living witness to a promise that wasn't broken. It grazed peacefully in the yard, played with Sophie on sunny afternoons, and sometimes allowed Emily to ride it for contemplative walks around the surroundings. Emily had grown during that journey in a way that couldn't be measured by time alone. She had learned that protecting someone doesn't just mean keeping them physically safe, but also preserving hope when everything seems lost. Sophie, in turn, had discovered that even in the most difficult situations, love finds a way to manifest itself and guide the steps of those who love each other. The mother built a new life there on the plains, helping Mrs. Martha with household chores and learning to cultivate the land that received her daughters with such generosity. Mr. John taught the girls about the secrets of nature, how to read the signs of weather, and the importance of respecting life's cycles. On starry nights, when the family gathered on the porch to talk and plan for the future, the horse was always nearby, like a silent guardian who had fulfilled its mission but chosen to remain. It was living proof that some promises transcend existence itself, crossing time with the persistence of true love. And so, under the infinite sky of the plains renewed by rain, the family discovered that true protection is that which crosses all difficulties, silent but firm, like a white horse that appears exactly at the moment when despair seems to defeat hope. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope that the journey of Emily, Sophie, and their family has deeply touched your hearts. This story of love, protection, and reunion teaches us that even in the most difficult situations, love finds a way to manifest itself and guide us. To continue being moved by equally touching narratives, we've prepared a special playlist with stories that explore the strength of family bonds and hope. Find it by clicking here. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave a like on this video. Every day we bring unique stories that celebrate the strength of the human heart and the beauty of the bonds that unite. Thus, don't miss our next content and tell us in the comments which part of the story